Welcome everybody to our seventh Go-BGC OCB webinar, where we're focusing on updating the community on science being done with BGC-Argo floats. We have a couple science presentations today. First, we'll have an update on the Go-BGC array from Yui Takeshita. And then we'll have presentations from Daniel Koestner and Sophie Shapiro on kind of high latitude biogeochemistry with BGC-Argo floats. My name is John Sharp. I'm on the organizing committee for this webinar series. I'm a research scientist at NOAA PMEL. And yeah, I think in a second I'll turn it over to Yui, but first I'll let everybody know that the chat is open. If you have questions during any of the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat. And then at the end of or after the presentations, we'll host a short Q&A session where you'll be able to unmute and ask questions as well. And we'll also go over the questions that have been put in the chat. So I will send it over to Yui.
Great, thanks, John, and thanks, Sophie and Daniel, for agreeing to give talks for this webinar. So I'm gonna restart every webinar with a quick update on the Go-BGC and BGC-Argo program. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that quickly. So just a reminder, BGC-Argo is a part of the One Argo program. So this is kind of the next 10-year vision of how the Argo program will evolve to meet the new societal and scientific goals. And so the target array size of One Argo is 4,700 floats. Within those, there are three categories. One is 2,500 core floats. So these are the foundation of the Argo array, temperature salinity measurements, 2,000 meters, 1,200 deep floats, which are floats that go down to full ocean depth, and then 1,000 BGC floats, which this webinar and the Go-BGC program contribute to. So the target is to maintain 1,000 BGC floats globally distributed, and historically about 50% of the Argo array has been sustained by the US. So the goal for the US contribution of BGC-Argo is to sustain an array of 500 BGC floats. And the justification and rationale for this array size has is outlined in the Biogeochemical Argo Science and Implementation Plan. You can read it, but we are in the process of updating this implementation plan with, as new float technology, sensor technologies come online. So hopefully in the next year or so, we will have an updated version of this implementation plan. Just a reminder, Argo and BGC-Argo and Argo, all data are freely available. The main place to go get the data for the Argo array is the Global Data Assembly Center, or GDAC. And for BGC-Argo, we encourage all users to use the SPROF, which is a synthetic profile file. And so this file includes, it merges all of the pressure axes into a single axis. So it makes it easy to use. And it has all of the necessary metadata related to the measurements. Additionally, there are monthly snapshots of the GDAC, which you can download from their website. And so if you want to write a publication, for example, or use a data for a publication, then we encourage using these snapshots because these monthly archives have DOIs associated with them, which allows for recreation of reanalysis and things like that. There has been a big effort at NOAA PMEL's group developing the One Argo toolbox. Hartmut Frenzel, John Sharp, Yibin, and Marin Kornek are all contributors to the One Argo toolbox. This is an open source toolbox that allows you to easily extract data from the Argo GDAC and visualize the data. And this toolbox is available in MATLAB and R, and some functionalities in Python. And the code is all available in GitHub. And additionally to the Argo GDAC, the BGC floats deployed through the SOCOM project, and GO-BGC are archived and available through data snapshots twice a year. And then so the main difference between the snapshot between the Argo program or the Argo GDAC and the floats through these two programs is that we provide additional derived carbon parameters, so specifically PCO2, DIC, alkalinity, and particulate organic carbon. And so this is not the whole global data set. It is only flows from these two programs. But if you want to use these derived carbon parameters, then you can use these snapshots as well. And we have a FAQ page on BGC-Argo data. So if you go to the GO-BGC website, data/data FAQ, there are some questions and answers to commonly asked questions about the data set. So how are we doing in terms of the global array? So this is what a hypothetical 1,000 float BGC-Argo array would look like. They're just randomly distributed 1,000 points. And currently, it looks something like this. It's actually not, so the plots here shows floats that have at least 4 sensors on them. And we have 584 operational floats that have at least 4 sensors. The yellow ticks are from either SOCOM or GO-BGC, and the blue ticks are from our international partners. So one thing that I really want to kind of highlight is that, the BGC-Argo array has really achieved pretty much a global coverage. There are some still holes, South Pacific and the Indian, and we're working hard to fill those in, but it's pretty good global coverage. And then so that really enables new types of science to be done. So you can do global synthesis, inventories and things like that. So I really encourage people listening in this webinar to think about how, creative new ways to analyze a global data set of BGC-Argo data. Updates on the GO-BGC program specifically. So since the last webinar, we have deployed 26 floats, and we have a total of 169 GO-BGC floats. And that's actually incorrect because we deployed one this morning. So it's 170 GO-BGC floats. And between the SOCOM and GO-BGC program, we're deploying about 2 floats a week. So we are working hard to get floats in the water. The white squares show the locations of the new floats that have gone in the last couple of months. So one to note is that the A13.5 cruise finally happened after a couple of years of delay. So we have a series of floats in the South Atlantic now. And another one I want to highlight in the next slide or two is that we deployed a BGC solo float that was built by MRV Systems. So this is a commercially available newly commercially available BGC float. We have 99 float deployments planned. So this is where ships have been identified and floats are or will be ready over the next 6 months or so. So these are the locations so that you can see that we're going to try to fill in the Indian Ocean hole and the South Pacific hole. So that's very exciting for us. There are contributions from the international partners over their, approximately about 250 floats over the next 5 years. Not all of them are 4+ sensors though, but these are the general areas that international partners have identified as target deployment areas. And one thing I want to emphasize, and I will keep emphasizing each time of these webinars, is that we're all here because we all believe in BGC-Argo as a useful tool to do science and for society. But the future of GO-BGC and BGC-Argo is still very uncertain. So for example, GO-BGC funding, we will end at the end of next year, in 2025. And then we will be deploying floats through 2026, but then there is no secured funding after that. So the US contribution, if we get no additional funding, will drop from 125 floats per year to probably 10 or less or something like that, right? And so it'll be a dramatic decrease in the number of floats that are being deployed. And so that is very alarming. And so I just want to make sure that everyone in the community is aware that nothing is in the bag, right? So we all have to work hard and advocate. If you believe in BGC-Argo, keep advocating to your colleagues and program managers and and anyone who would listen, essentially. But a couple of things that will help, push the needle is to write proposals using BGC-Argo data, write papers using BGC-Argo data. These are the best metrics that funding agencies can use to justify how much of a useful resource BGC-Argo is for the community. And finally, cite us properly so that we can track which papers and proposals are using BGC-Argo data. Finally, a quick update that I mentioned earlier. There was a MRV-built BGC S2A that was deployed. That's a picture of the commercially available BGC S2A float. This is a designed, the design was made at SIO and now licensed to MRV. So the first deployment was off San Diego, but the float is just hovering right at the 1,000-meter shelf break. So it hasn't gone to 2,000 meters, but it's been over the past couple of months just kind of, looping around there. So hopefully it'll drift offshore shortly, but the data looks beautiful. Okay, so this transitioning. So last year we had a BGC-Argo data workshop in August, and this was a really successful workshop, I think, that was focused on training participants on how to use and analyze BGC-Argo data. The workshop could not have happened without team leads who helped organize research projects that the participants pursued during the workshop. And so we will be hosting something similar in 2025. So hopefully, so maybe in the next 6-10 months, the announcement will come out. But the two speakers today were team leads from the data workshop. So we were really excited to hear the progress and updates since the workshop. So, John.
Yep, very quickly so we can get started and go to our speakers. So I'll introduce each of them. Our first speaker will be Daniel Koestner, who received his PhD from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in 2019, where he studied light scattering by marine particles. And he's now a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Physics and Technology at the University of Bergen in Norway. And then we'll hear from Sophie Shapiro. And Sophie is a PhD student at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. And her primary research focus is on the transport of deep and abyssal waters in the Southern Ocean. So I will turn it over to Daniel first.
All right. Oh, I'm going to steal the screen. Okay. Oh no, where is it? Here. Okay, I think we're good, right?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone for being here, and thank you for having that workshop. It was really awesome for me to get really involved with BGC-Argo data. So that was a huge start for me, and we had a nice group, and we've still been keeping up with this project on studying the biogeochemical properties of the Lofoten Basin Eddy using a pretty long time series of BGC-Argo float data from the region. But first, I want to talk a little bit about me and what I study. So I study ocean optics. So I study in particular, I study light scattering. And so what we study is the optical properties of marine particles, and we try to understand and relate variability in optics to variability in what's in the water. What is dissolved, what is suspended, size, shape, all of those things play a role in light scattering. And so that's kind of the lens I've been coming from, and now I'm getting more into BGC-Argo because I'm super excited about that platform as a platform for putting on optical sensors. So a little outline here, particular organic carbon. I'm going to start with that because that's kind of the main topic. I'm going to talk very briefly about a novel POC algorithm that we published just earlier this year that I think could be very useful for people who study POC with optics or satellites. And then I'm going to talk about the Lofoten Basin. So first, I really think it's important to talk about POC and what it is. What is a particle? And we're not talking about atomic particles here, which I get confused with our physics people in our department, but we're talking about suspended material. And this is particulate, so it's suspended. It's not inorganic, so it's not a mineral, but it's organic. And this usually contains phytoplankton, heterotrophic organisms, and non-living organic detrital material. It generally should also include colloidal material like viruses, small bacteria, and phytoplankton and other detritus. It forms the base of marine food webs, and it's rapidly overturning, and it's a major component of the biological carbon pump, which transfers carbon from the surface to the deep ocean. And I think it's really important to also note this, that it's operationally defined. It's not so, it's what's on a filter, basically. So here, I really like this slide because this shows all of the marine constituents contributing to optical properties. Because after all, we're trying to estimate and study POC from optics. So it varies many orders of magnitude in particle size on what's in the ocean and what's contributing to optical properties. And so where is our POC? It's typically at 0.7 microns based on the filter that we use. So it's not all of the particles. And I just think that it's an important distinction to make. So there are things that are not in our POC that maybe should be or are affecting light scattering. So that's just the backdrop that I like to throw in there at the beginning here. Okay, so the algorithm that we developed is based on a global data set of over 400 surface and subsurface samples from some of the main oceanic basins. We had spectral backscattering measured with hydroscat instruments, which are slightly different than what's on BGC. And we have POC determined with 25 millimeter GFF filters, and we have chlorophyll A from HPLC analysis. So again, what are the sensors we have on BGC-Argo that we're trying to use? Well, it's backscattering and chlorophyll A fluorescence. And so can we use this to get POC? So the first step is usually asking chlorophyll, is chlorophyll a proxy for POC? And here's our data set. It's not so bad. There's a general linear trend here, but there's a pretty big spread. So we have almost an order of magnitude of POC for the same chlorophyll A values. What about backscattering? Backscattering is a little better, and it's typically what people use, but it also has a big spread, and especially in some regions of the Arctic or at depths. So it's not always the best proxy for POC from our database, at least. So the background motivation of our study was POC from BGC-Argo floats is typically relied on simple models relating backscattering to POC, and it can be subject to large uncertainties under various oceanic conditions. Basically, the amount of backscatter per unit POC varies throughout the ocean, and it's fundamentally driven by changes in particle assemblage, composition, and size distribution. So we've asked this question, can the inclusion of a composition term in optically based models improve our estimates? So what is our composition term? Here it's chlorophyll A divided by backscattering. Again, this is something we can get easily in situ with our BGC-Argo floats. And we generally see it trends well with these other proxies for composition. So the higher this value, the higher chlorophyll to backscattering, the more organic dominated our samples are, or the more phytoplankton dominated they are. So back to our original model, POC versus backscattering. So here's some relationships from various studies that show that some relationships fit the data well, while others fit better in other places. So what's driving this variability? Well, if we overlay our composition term, which is colored here, you can see that there's sort of a natural deviation in terms of composition and this relationship. So can we use that dimension to improve our estimates? So we checked a bunch of different formulations of this kind of multivariable equation where we have backscattering and we have composition to estimate POC. And we found sort of our best fit here, which we call model B, and it's this multivariable model. I'm not going to go into too much more than that right now, but we have our paper. I really recommend reading it. There's a lot of information about how we apply it and validation, a ton of validation. So assume that that's okay, and we're going to use that model. So a case for application, Lofoten Basin Eddy. So this was the project that we started at this workshop, and we had a nice team of people spanning, career stages, but also disciplines from we have two physical oceanographers, a modeler, and some early career people. So it's a nice group that we've been able to sort of learn from each other and help each other out. So here is our study region. I know it's not really part of the GO-BGC array, I think, but in any case, these are the Norwegian floats here. So we have 22 floats in our region of interest. We did use this one Argo toolbox to help, siphon out the ones that we're interested in. We have 1,831 profiles after our QC, and this is from 2010 to 2022. Right now is the focus of our analysis. So here's the region, and here's our eddy. This is a lot to take in, but it'll play for a little bit. So the first thing to note is the color. The green color is a satellite product of primary production, and that's showing kind of our seasons as they progress. And you can see our floats individually moving around with a tail of about 50 days. And the size of the circle is proportional to the amount of POC at depth beneath the productive zone. And the color is a proxy for this transfer efficiency. So how effective the POC is able to penetrate to depth. And there's our eddy there. So this is a product from satellite altimetry data. And there's been some post-processing to sort of remove eddy mergers and splits. And so we end up with sort of our core eddy that seems to exist for the whole time period that we're interested in. And we've drawn a dashed line to sort of represent sort of what we consider the influence zone of the eddy. Partially and that's something that we're still curious about if that's okay. And I should also note that all of this is preliminary, and so I'm very interested in any discussion we might have after. But so this is the big picture, and this is what we're doing is we're going to take this data and we're going to try to see if there are any differences inside versus outside this eddy. And we have some lulls where we don't have data, but for the most part, we have a nice time series to work with here. Oops, sorry. So here are our research questions. Can we utilize this 12-year time series of BGC-Argo floats to identify unique signatures of the Lofoten Basin Eddy? And do we observe a more efficient biological carbon pump due to sort of eddy pumping of this anti-cyclonic eddy? So this is an anti-cyclonic eddy. So it's actually pumping warm water down and has very deep mixed layers. So here are our temperature profiles. These are average monthly temperature profiles inside the eddy on top and outside the eddy on the bottom. The shading here represents plus or minus 1 standard deviation, and these horizontal dashed lines are the mixed layers. So you can see pretty clearly that we have deeper mixed layers inside the eddy, and especially in the winter and spring. And we also have warmer water at depth, especially in the winter. But you can see it most clearly in these sections we have here. So here we have our average values, average profiles as a function of time. So, and the dashed line here is the mixed layer, is the average mixed layer depth. Inside on the left, outside in the middle, and then the difference of inside minus outside on the right. So the main thing to see here is that we have much warmer water at depth here, below 400 or so meters. Whereas we have slightly colder water at the very near surface, especially in May, June, July, August. And that's sort of a feature of this region, of this eddy. So here's our POC. These are our POC profiles. This is actually the small pool. We'll talk about that later, but these are our average monthly profiles of POC. On the top is the inside and the bottom is outside. And we have this dotted line is actually our productive zone, which is average stuff from the PAR sensors that are on some of the floats. So again, you see we see a nice pulse of POC in the surface in the spring and early summer, or most of the summer. And these time sections are really nice for looking at sort of differences between inside versus outside the eddy. And here the main difference that you see is that we have more POC at the surface in maybe May, June, July, August. Earlier, there's a little bit less actually, which probably is due to mixing. But what the main difference here, at least that's visible, is this green values in the rightmost plot in May, June, July at the very near surface. So it's more productive. However, even if we have small differences in the depth profiles here, so from 200 to 1,000 meters, we see slight greens and slight reds here. And even though they might be small numbers, it's hard to see here, but when you do depth integrated, it actually can make a big difference. So the next step here is we're going to look at a depth integrated POC. And here we're going to treat it as in the yellow is this productive zone, and the green or gray or whatever color you see, it's the twilight zone, which is below the productive zone. And the productive zone here, because we have a mix of floats with different sensors, it's either the maximum of the mixed layer, 1% of surface PAR or 10% of the maximum chlorophyll A fluorescence. So that's how we define our productive zone. And you can see this nice pattern of increase in POC integrated throughout the whole water column in these April, May, June, July, and then it sort of trails off as we go on. That's in the total. You also see it in the surface in this productive zone, but you also can see maybe slightly delayed in this gray-green color, an increase also in May, June, July, maybe a little bit offset from when you see the surface signature. And I also here I'm showing, it's a little hard to understand. Oh no, it's not hard to understand. So the Z50, so this is coming from the top here. We have black and gray, black for inside the eddy and gray for outside the eddy. And this is the depth at which half of our POC exists. So if your value is 500 meters, it means that half your POC is in the upper 500 meters and half is below. And so here's where we start to see sort of potentially some noticeable differences between in and out. So especially in June, July, and August, we see that the gray line is deeper. So more of our POC is at depth outside the eddy than inside the eddy. And that could be something that could be something that's worth looking into. And so the other thing we're doing here is we're gonna look at flux. So we have average integrated POC for each of these months, and we're gonna follow the methodology from Delamo and Mork 2014, and also sort of some of this common language for calculating flux, which would be the change in integrated POC within some depth range with time. And we're treating this as a sort of an average month that represents the inside versus outside the eddy. And we're using a month or the approximate number of days to calculate our fluxes. And then we have our transfer efficiency. And this is the flux at from the bottom of the productive layer, 200 meters down, to the total flux within the entire twilight zone. So this is saying basically how efficient is the POC at getting 200 meters below the productive zone. Okay. And this is new for me, so I'm really curious if people have some feedback here. We're almost done. So this is our fluxes as a function of time. And here we have the productive zone is a dashed line. So this is in the surface. This is our flux in the surface, the average flux for each month. And the twilight zone is this greenish bar. And then within that is the dark blue color, which represents the flux in that region 200 meters below the productive zone. And then at the bottom, we have the transfer efficiency, which is the ratio of those two fluxes. It's a lot. This is a lot to unpack, and I'm still a little confused about how to interpret a negative flux. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to zoom in on April, May, June, because this is probably the most interesting time period here. So inside the eddy, we see in April a huge amount of increase in POC in the twilight zone. Now, if we look at the blue line, the blue marker on that bar, we see that it's much lower than the green one. And so what this is saying is that we actually have and then the bottom here we have our transfer efficiency. So we have 50% transfer efficiency inside the eddy. So despite this increase in POC, not all of it's making it depth. And then if you look at outside the eddy, you see they're much closer. So we interpret that as a much more effective efficiency transfer, at least in that first 200 meters. So this is our first. So what we think is going on here is that inside the eddy, we have a less effective biological carbon pump actually than outside the eddy, which is a little bit counter to what we were expecting because of this mixed layer pump. So what might be driving this change? So here we have apparent oxygen utilization. So recall that we had more POC at the surface. So we would expect to see this blue, this negative AOU, meaning that there's production there. But what we actually see here in the difference is we actually see more respiration. So we see higher values of AOU inside the eddy compared to outside the eddy. So what we're starting to think is that there's more remineralization or grazing inside the eddy compared to outside the eddy, which is leading to less effective export. Now, there's one other aspect of this that might be playing a role in its particle size. So although large POC particles are a less significant component of the POC budget, it may play an important role in export efficiency. So here we can see that there are lower amounts of POC in large particles inside the eddy compared to outside. And that's where you have this purple color in the surface here. So what we're seeing here is that there might be more large and faster sinking particles outside of the eddy that might be leading to more efficient export outside compared to inside. So here are our conclusions. A significant BGC-Argo dataset exists for the Lofoten Basin, supporting comparative analysis based on monthly averages. The eddy tends to support more production than surrounding waters in the late spring and summer months. But despite this increased production, we see lower transfer efficiency inside the eddy compared to outside the eddy. And preliminary analysis suggests this is probably due to higher remineralization and slower sinking rates within the eddy. Further work is needed to explore the statistical significance of these conclusions because we do have much more data outside the eddy and maybe potential eddy boundary effects and also effects of different water masses that might be playing a role. But still, I think that these conclusions are pretty good. Yeah, that's it. Thanks. This is actually a sort of a approximate color rendering of irradiance data from BGC-Argos that I'm working on this sort of pet project to projecting this information to in an audio-visual experience. So if anyone's interested in that type of stuff, contact me and we can you can join the project so we can build it out more. But that is all. I guess I will stop sharing my screen. And yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. And yeah, we have some questions in the chat, but we'll get to those at the end. Daniel, you can feel free to answer them there, or we can just address them after Sophie's presentation. And that was awesome. I feel like that study really highlights what can be done with BGC float data that really, like, there's no other way that we could undertake a study like that. And I think we'll hear more about that with Sophie's presentation as well. So I will pass it over to Sophie if you want to start screen sharing.
Yeah, thanks. Let me get that set up.
That looks good.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Shapiro, and today I'm going to be talking about my experience leading the Southern Ocean Sea Ice Team at the 2023 BGC-Argo Float Data Workshop. So you may be asking, what is the BGC-Argo Float Data Workshop? So this workshop took place over 3 days in August of 2023, with the goal of teaching more people to use the BGC-Argo data to show what kinds of questions the data set can answer and to help promote community among BGC-Argo users. So at this workshop, the attendees are mostly graduate students and early career researchers coming from over 35 different institutions. And a third of them had never used BGC-Argo data before, and another third considered themselves novice users. So this was a really big outreach opportunity to get a lot more people introduced to the data and using the data. I was a team leader at the workshop, which meant that I had to come up with a guiding scientific question for my team and provide the background information and the data needed to address it. And then during the workshop, I tailored the questions and the roles for my team members so that everybody could be predictive in line with their interests and their experience level. In short, my job was to make sure everybody was on the same page, to address any questions that came up, and to help foster community and collaboration among the group. At the same time that the workshop was going on, we were seeing record low sea ice anomalies in the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean sea ice had remained relatively stable for several years until suddenly it didn't. And so here in the dashed red line, you can see the 2023 sea ice extent compared to previous years in gray. And you can see how especially here in August, which is where we were when we were preparing for the workshop, we had reached a record low ice extent anomaly. Sea ice is super important because it has all these feedbacks on ocean heat, on salinity, on surface mixing and stratification. It's also really important for the spring bloom, the timing, and the primary productivity in the Southern Ocean. So the key question motivating my team was, how can we use the BGC-Argo data set to monitor ocean changes that are connected to the Southern Ocean low sea ice anomalies at the time? The focus of the workshop is BGC-Argo data. So as a team lead, I selected a small handful of BGC floats that were active in the Southern Ocean at the time of the workshop. Those are shown on the right. And those are primarily the floats that the team focused on. Many of the participants access the data through one of the Argo toolboxes, the one Argo toolbox in MATLAB, in R, the ArgoPy Python toolbox. So I just want to take a moment to thank the many people who contributed to the toolboxes and to the workshop organizers who helped everybody learn how to use the toolboxes, because that really gave us a head start in accessing this data. The format of the workshop, it was 2.5 days long. And the first half was all talks giving introduction to the data set, how to use the data, science talks, and basically all the information that we needed to get started working with our groups. On day 2, as you can see, we spent all day working hard and taking no breaks. And on day 3, we reported back to the rest of the workshop on what we did. So for my team in particular, we divided into 4 subgroups with slightly different focuses. So for the next part of the talk, I'm going to go through each different subgroup and summarize the questions that motivated them, a plot that they came up with. And I think you'll see that even though we only had 1 day to work with the data, we really came up with a lot of different questions and ideas. So the first subgroup was Ram Patel, who was really interested in the seasonal variability in the near surface. So he aggregated floats from across the Southern Ocean to plot temperature, salinity, oxygen, and nitrate in the seasonal cycles and look at how much seasonal variability we see. Look for long-term changes in the temperature or salinity and things that might link to sea ice changes as well. Next, I have my R users, who are Tessa and Francis, who are interested in seasonal changes in chlorophyll A. So they have these lovely plots of temperature and chlorophyll with depth. And they use these plots to look for the timing of the spring bloom. Here you can see it's in this January plot. In order to investigate the seasonal cycle for chlorophyll A measurements. My third subgroup, I had Denise looking at regional differences in between basins. So she compared float data from 2 different basins. And she was really interested in looking at the mixed layer depth, which you can see is really different in between the 2 regions. And also highlighting these upwelling areas where the low oxygen CDW was coming up toward the mixed layer. And Denise also worked together with Ashley, who did similar work with a comparison of winter profiles over different years and across different regions. So here in her plots, you can clearly see the mixed layer depths across the different years and different basins. And she was also looking for subsurface heat anomalies in the profiles. And finally, my last subgroup was Giannis and Andrew, who were interested in air-sea fluxes. So Giannis is focusing on PCO2 and Andrew on oxygen to investigate how sea ice changes might affect air-sea fluxes in the Southern Ocean. So overall, the work of all of these participants really illustrated the potential of what can happen when you put this really powerful data set in the hands of very talented researchers. We only had 1 day really to work with data in this workshop, but with more time, there's definitely a lot we could expand on the work that we did. And we have a lot of further questions, such as how would our findings hold up if we expanded the analysis to look at more floats? we didn't have time to look into like the heat flux, especially in the ice anomaly zones, changes potentially to ACC fronts and whether those are moving, how much the observations that we saw are correlating with the sea ice changes. And there's a lot of questions that we had that can only be answered with continued monitoring of the region, such as how much do the trends that we were seeing extend beyond to other seasons. How does last winter's sea ice influence the ocean conditions this year? And what are the long-term effects of changing sea ice on primary production or carbon fluxes or bottom water production or other ocean conditions? So those are all things that we can look into with more BGC-Argo data. And compared to last August, not only do we have more profiles from all the floats that we looked at last year, we also, I want to highlight all of the new BGC-Argo floats that have been deployed in the Southern Ocean since last August. So I've plotted those in the red dots over here. There's a lot of them, and I've been assured that actually, even though I made this 3 days ago, it's already out of date because there's been new floats that have been deployed already in the Southern Ocean. So that's really exciting, and it means that there's a lot of future opportunities to continue with this work and to use the new data. To wrap up, I really want to highlight the benefits of having a workshop setting to do this kind of work. I think it was really a huge success in terms of really introducing people who have never used float data before to be within 2 days, like well on their way to producing really interesting science. There's also a lot of benefits, I think, to being part of the larger community and to working collaboratively in the same room together. So for instance, in my team, we started with a giant just brainstorm of what are the important questions and how can we use the data that we have to get insights on these questions. And that group brainstorm really allows us to look at all sides of the issue and come up with really good questions and ideas. And it also, working together in one room helps us with roadblocks. I had team members who had never used float data before and were able to get help from others in the room to just download the data. I had team members who were really experienced working in the Southern Ocean to help folks that hadn't really worked in that region before to identify ACC fronts or critical basins that were really important. I also think that working together on a bunch of slightly different related projects really help people to see the connections between them. For example, between the folks that were looking at mixed layer depth and the folks that were looking at the air sea fluxes and really see the connections. And I think it also gave us more ideas on how to use the data. I had in my group a couple of physical oceanographers who usually only look at temperature and salinity data. And I think that this gave them an opportunity to look at other BGC variables and really understand the connections there as well. So overall, I think the workshop was a great format to really bring out the creativity of the researchers and the enormous potential that's in this data set. So finally, I want to say this was a great experience. I learned a lot, even as a advanced float user, and I know others learned a lot as well. And one of the main pieces of feedback we got was that people wanted more time, which I think is a really good sign that people were actually enjoying themselves. And so I just want to end by giving a really big thank you to all my team members at the workshop who made all the wonderful plots that were in this presentation, to the GO-BGC team and all the workshop organizers who made the workshop possible and a huge success. And I just want to encourage everybody to go out and use the BGC-Argo dataset to take advantage of the benefits of the BGC-Argo community. And finally, as Yui said, to write more proposals so that we can keep the BGC-Argo going. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I really appreciated that kind of recap of how the workshop went, and it's a great advertisement for the upcoming workshop next year, right, Yui?
Yeah. So yeah, I want to, Sophie, you did such a wonderful job at recapping that workshop, way better than what we did. So thank you so much for that. And I want to reiterate our big thank you to all of the team leads. It's very obvious from what you presented how much time and effort the team leads had to put in to make this a successful workshop. And yeah, it could not have happened without you all. So thank you very much. It was, that was the key to success. So hopefully you'll have another fun workshop coming up in the next year or so. or next summer. So great.
Yeah, and I've seen Daniel's been answering away in the chat. So I would invite anyone else who has questions to, feel free to add them to the chat or to raise your hand. I just wanted to ask Sophie, before we kind of get into it, if there was one particular aspect of the preliminary results that came out from your group that you think you would prioritize in terms of, connecting the BGC float data to the Southern Ocean sea ice? Is there one thing that sticks out?
I think there's many things that stick out. One of the great things about the workshop is really getting the opportunity to explore all different avenues. Like as a team lead, I just brainstormed a bunch of different ideas, and if I were to do that on my own, I would really just pick one thing to focus on. And I'm mostly a physical oceanographer, so I probably would have focused on like the heat fluxes and the heat anomalies. But that's why it was so exciting to be able to say yes to all of the ideas, because I had a whole team and look at things like the air sea fluxes, which I had never looked at before, and see the trends in there. So I think if I were to, I think the first thing to do is really come back to all of those plots with the new data from all the new floats that have been launched in the past year, because I think that would really give us a full picture. It was really exciting in August to be at the workshop and feel like we're on the cutting edge of something that's happening right now. But in retrospect, looking back, we can really see what were some of the implications of that and pull data from throughout the entire winter instead of just half of it. So I think that would be my first step to follow through on that.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that was really cool well, it wasn't cool that the sea ice was, super low that year, but it was exciting to be on the cutting edge of that. Ken, question?
Yeah, and kind of a comment question. So it's really cool to see Dan's talk kind of highlights the fact that although Argo is designed to be this global system, you can actually do these sort of sub-mesoscale or mesoscale anyway processes studying in Eddy. But we with lots of repeat observations, you start to see areas. So really the question's for Sophie. So now that we have a bunch of floats in the Southern Ocean, you guys give any thought to, doing, kind of very much more focused things like ice edge, watching the processes as ice melts back or whatever, now that there are a bunch of floats out there?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I think, during the workshop, because it happened in August, a lot of the floats that were under ice, they hadn't reported back because they were still under the ice. And now that we have had the entire season has gone by, one of the really exciting things looking back at the data set is that now a lot of the floats that were under ice then have popped back up and have given back all the data that they collected throughout August and the past couple months. So I think that exactly as you said, that would be a great idea, and especially focused on those floats that we couldn't access the data in August because they were still under ice, would be a really interesting place to start with that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you both.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is more of a comment or an update, I guess. But the data team at MBARI right now is working on putting in a flag. So say ice avoidance algorithm triggered or not. So right now trying to find under ice floats is a little bit of a, like a art. Anyways, if you assume that's under ice if it's missing GPS and etc. So it's not the easiest to extract just under ice floats, and then so we are working on making that a lot easier for the community. We don't have a timeline for that. We do have prototype files generated for that, but hopefully, we'll make it an announcement when that's available, and then so hopefully that will inspire more people to use, do these under ice analyses. So yeah.
Thanks, Yui. That is a great thing that I would find very helpful to be able to look at that. So definitely let us all know when that goes live.
Awesome. So any other questions, people can feel free to raise their hands. Daniel, is there anything that you've answered in the chat that you wanted to expand upon? I know you've been kind of furiously replying to people.
Just one that we have two, we did publish two papers, and the updated one is really the one I would recommend anyone look at if they want to consider applying this approach for POC. And we have a lot of good discussion about uncertainties and if you, I think there's a link to a algorithm, a MATLAB script that has actually provides uncertainties in the algorithm output, which is really useful if you're interested in seeing in using that type of product. And if anyone understands, I do have a question about negative fluxes and how to interpret that. If someone wants to reach out to me and talk about that, I'm really curious how people interpret that type of result.
I will read your paper, Daniel, but is that algorithm global or is it regional?
So the whole concept was that it's adaptable to sort of the compositional characteristics. So it should be globally applicable. It uses a pretty large data set that exists, that has samples from Atlantic, Pacific, Alaska, Arctic, up in the Pacific Arctic, and the use of a composition term to sort of weight our BBP to POC relationship sort of suggests that we can use it in different environments because one of the key sources of uncertainty or variability is accounted for. But there are some, in the paper, there's some really important discussion of, we use the different backscattering sensor than the backscattering sensor that is on the Argo floats. And there seems to be a potential adjustment that should be accounted for there. And we talk about that and we have a recommendation. And we also, this DOC adsorption effect, whether or not you remove DOC from your POC when you build the algorithm, and whether or not we didn't do that because we think that there are scattering signal from the material that gets through a filter that it's better to include that. But there's a nice discussion where we're really clear. I think we're really clear about how to treat that and whether or not you should or shouldn't do that. But it's not so simple as just take this algorithm and apply it to your BGC-Argo data, because I do quite a bit of treatment before, and I remove a sort of a blank in the background at depth. Yeah.
I saw Lynn's hand go up for a hot second. Lynn?
Thought there might have been a flux comment coming.
Yeah, I was hoping.
Maybe not. That's okay. Any other questions, I'd say, before we wrap up? Okay, cool. Seeing none. Yeah, I think let's just take another opportunity to thank Daniel and Sophie both for their work leading teams at last year's workshop and for their awesome presentations today. And thank you all for joining. We'll see you in 3 months or so. Expect an email from Lynn, Daniel.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye all.